So Beck, there we go. Whatever her name is, confirm that. And Thelma, we call her. And before I stop sharing my screen, I want to introduce Dr. Jennifer Phillips. And first of all, I want to welcome her to San Antonio. She's new to our city, coming, what is in April or March?
January.
January, because you taught that whole semester, didn't you?
Yeah.
She is a professor at Texas A&M San Antonio. And we want to make her welcome. And when she has time, we hope she will come out and join us on some of our escapades, you might say. She's a broadly trained wildlife biologist. She has expertise in ornithology, animal behavior, community ecology, and conservation. And she grew up in a rural farming town outside of Fresno, California. And she was fascinated from an early time about how nature persists despite all the things we do to her, the creatures, how adaptable they are and so forth. And she's turned that fascination into a career. And that's what her research is focusing on, how anthropogenic, now remember that word because that's for your next cocktail party, throw that one out. Anthropogenic activity, now that's activity that originates from human activity, such as landscape change, artificial light at night, and noise pollution. How this alters animal interactions within and between species. And she's particularly interested in whether and how animals do adapt to these changes, and whether behavioral adaptations lead to population and community differences in ecosystems. So comparing ecosystems with a lot of light noise with those that don't have it and see if the same species. So tonight she's going to tell us about her research on how urban noise affects communication in one species, the white-crowned sparrow, which we've all heard poor Sam Peabody singing here in the winter. And a white-crowned, no wait, that was white-throat, that's white, what do you call it?
White-throated sparrow.
Thank you, white-throated. The white-crowned is the one we hear buzzing in the mesquites all around Mitchell Lake. They seem to love that area there. So, and the idea in studying this species is to get the information from a single species study and to better understand the effects of light and noise pollution on avian populations and communities. So I'm really looking forward to this. This is so relevant to what we're doing in San Antonio. So I'm going to stop my share and shut myself up and turn off my video and turn it over to you, Dr. Jennifer Phillips.
All right, it's going to take me a second to share my screen. Let's see. Optimize, share.
Okay, I'm seeing the, yeah, there it goes. It's doing its little blip and it's gonna widen out here in just a second.
Okay, tell me when it looks like it's ready to go.
Okay, it's kind of cut off one side right now like it did before. There we go, all ready to go. Okay. Take it away.
All right, great. And so we're recording. So as Patsy told you guys, I'll be talking about my research about sensory pollution in the Anthropocene, the effects of light and noise pollution on birds in the age of humans. So in terms of evolutionary time, anthropogenic habitats are a novel environment. You can see here in this map of the night sky that human activity is pervasive and introduces sensory pollution or light at night. Patsy, we can still hear your microphone. Sorry.
I'm sorry. My husband is talking to me, and I apologize.
Yeah, it's okay. If you want to put it on mute, that'll help me keep focused.
I will. I do apologize. I thought I had.
Okay. All right. So, and the reason we care about artificial light at night is that we care about how it disrupts circadian rhythms. So especially for birds that depend on light cues for phenology and migration. And so light regulates the daily rhythms of many animals, including birds. It lets them know what time of day they should become active, like when to be awake and feeding their offspring, like this robin feeding its chicks. And it also functions as a cue that lets birds know when to migrate, so what path they should take via the sun and the stars, and kicks into gear the physiological processes that dictate a breeding season. So we know that artificial light at night affects sleep and stress levels. One graduate student that I worked with at Cal Poly, Danielle Ferraro, conducted an experiment where she applied light inside of nest boxes. These were mostly used by bluebirds. She and similar studies done in Europe show that activity patterns are altered and sleep can be disrupted, along with nestling stress corticosteroid levels increase with light in these nest boxes. And I know we're here about birds, but it's not just birds that are affected by artificial light at night. So out in my field sites in New Mexico, I have undergrads working on projects on bats and insects. So bat diversity changes with artificial light at night. So here on this graph here, we have richness on the y-axis and a light treatment versus a quiet treatment. So the richness is much higher in light treated sites. And I have another student who's working on insect populations, and this graph here is showing specifically beetles or coleopterans. And you can see there's a decent amount of coleopterans in control plots on average, but there's the most in light plots, there's the least in noise plots, and light and noise combined is actually seeming to be kind of in the middle, almost reaching the same level as a control plot. So there's lots of effects that light can have, especially human-caused light, on animal behaviors and where they're showing up. But anthropogenic light pollution is not the only type of sensory pollution that animals can encounter. It's often accompanied by human-generated noise, as you can see here in this noise map of the United States. So here, yellow is indicating the noisiest area. So you can basically see the outline of large cities. So you can see San Antonio here in the middle of Texas. So those are the loudest. Obviously cities are the loudest, but see how it's light blue through much of America, even where it's pretty rural. And that's because noise really travels even from rural roads. So there's not much quiet left in the United States. There's a few spots in the top of the Rocky Mountains. Oops. Got excited. There's and the Adirondacks in New York. So this noise often interferes with animal communication and induces stress responses. And so research in the past 20 years has started to focus more so on noise rather than light pollution, and how noise affects communication between and within species. So when an animal is signaling without noise, that signal can travel a certain spherical distance, as seen in this diagram. So you see a little bird perched at the top of its tree in the middle, and a neighboring bird and a passing bird can hear that bird if there's no large background noises. But if background noise increases 3 decibels, that listening area of those receivers is cut in half. If you add another 3 decibels of noise, it's cut in half again. And so that really reduces that listening area. So now this signaler there in the middle is not really reaching anyone that he's trying to signal to. So because of this disruption of everyday communication, we know that many ecological interactions are disrupted. So we know that noise can filter bird communities based on their vocal frequency. So what pitches these birds sing at. So lower pitches tend to be masked by low pitch traffic noise. Traffic noise, air conditioning noise is usually at low frequencies. And also many predatory birds, such as jays, tend to avoid noise, which can lead to loss of ecosystem services like seed caching by jays, which in the system I work in helps regenerate pinyon forests. So other birds that might be prey species of the jays actually seem to benefit from noise indirectly when jays are avoiding noise. So in certain senses, you have increases in nesting success if it's a species that can tolerate the noise in the first place. Even if birds can't tolerate noise, there's often an increased level of stress from having noise anywhere in the region. So in the real world, light and noise pollution typically co-occur, yet they're rarely studied together. So there's a big need to understand the effects of light and noise together and how they interact with each other to better find management solutions. So we know that these pollutants are widespread, and there are lots of questions that can be asked within this framework that fall within evolutionary ecology, animal behavior, and community ecology. And that brings me to my research, which focuses on how animals cope with sensory pollution and what the fitness consequences are, especially for birds. So today I'll attempt to answer these overarching questions, first with the population of white-crowned sparrows, and then with a whole community of breeding birds. So for part one, let's see if I can play this video for you. It's lagging for me too. So there's our handsome white-crowned sparrow singing in the middle of San Francisco. I just wanted to include that since I know you guys all love photos and videos of birds. But just a little bit more background information. We know that animals use acoustic signals to communicate, and there's good evidence that song is used in male-male competition and female choice, where a receiver's decision and response to a signal drive sexual selection for an acoustic phenotype. So for many of us researchers that study bird songs, how these songs function is a major question in animal behavior. And so if song is an honest signal of male quality, we also expect it to relate to the physical information about the singer. And that's called being an index signal. So an index signal is a signal which conveys physical information about the signaler. So for example, in prothonotary warblers, males that sing more are larger with larger tails or longer tails, and they acquire better territories earlier in the season and closer to desirable water resources. In black-capped chickadees, the male with the best territories have higher food resources, and they sing the most consistent songs and are more dominant in the social hierarchy. So vocal performance is one way males might assess each other or females might assess a mate in some bird species. And we often see this in sparrow and wren species that have highly trilled vocalizations. So when I say vocal performance, this spectrogram you see here, this is a visual representation in the black and white of a trilled song. I'm talking about the rate at which the bird delivers these repeated broadband notes. So this is physically limited by the beak and throat movements in the bird. So conspecific birds will vary in their abilities to perform a fast trill at wide bandwidths. And thus it is one song trait that appears to be used in male-male competition and female choice. Females prefer higher performance songs, so faster songs at wide bandwidths, and males respond more strongly when defending their territories to these high performance songs in many species. So thus this trait, when I say vocal performance, I'm talking about a trilled portion of a song, and this trilled portion of song is under sexual selection. So because birdsong is a long distance signal, it's also under natural selection or environmental pressure by the soundscape that it travels through. And so there's many ways that birds might be able to adapt to increased background noise. So let me orient you to this graphic over here on the bottom left of your screen. So I have frequency on the x-axis, so the pitch of sounds, and the loudness of the sound in decibels SPL here on the y-axis. And so this orange spectrum is showing the spectral range of a bird song, a typical bird song. And the black is representing a noise spectrum. So you can see there's higher noise. Usually this is an urban noise spectrum at lower frequencies. And so to adapt to background noise caused by humans, birds can, what we've observed actually over and over again is shifts to higher frequencies. So these lower pitched parts of the song can be unmasked if they just shift their frequencies up usually. Another obvious adaptation that birds can do is sing louder. If you sing louder, your song will travel farther. Birds have also been known to alter the time of day that they sing. So they'll instead of singing at the normal dawn point, they will actually sing earlier before traffic starts or later, or they'll just sing more, they'll just sing all day. Other potential adaptations include decreasing territory sizes, or maybe even increasing perceptual abilities. And so the way that birds do these can either be through immediate signaling flexibility, or it can occur over time via cultural evolution. So thinking about these song behaviors, I have two main questions I'll address today. The first being, are adjustments to song structure affecting signal quality? And are adjustments to song structure affecting signal salience, or how the birds are understanding the song or responding to song? And so again, I'm using the subspecies Nuttall's white-crowned sparrows as a model system in the Bay Area of California. So these birds are year-round residents in the Bay Area along all of coastal California, or most of coastal California. And they only sing one song type. They don't have a large repertoire like some of the other sparrows. So people have been studying them since the 1950s. So we know a lot about their behavior and song learning processes. They're found in many habitats, but their native habitat before humans would have consisted of more of a native coastal sage scrub, specifically for this subspecies. So you can see from this aerial view, San Francisco down on the bottom is highly urbanized with a few green pockets of urban parks. And then just across the Golden Gate Bridge, you have a more natural habitat in terms of Point Reyes. And these are some of my sampling locations where these dots are located. And so I recorded birds from urban San Francisco, Richmond, and rural Point Reyes. Richmond is in the East Bay of the Bay Area, and measured vocal performance of the trill portion of their songs, mostly in 2016, but I've been studying these birds since 2013. And of course, this is a highly collaborative project. So Luis Baptista is one of the researchers from Cal Academy that started recording these birds back in the 1950s and 60s. And I worked with Liz Derryberry and David Luther and their postdocs and grad students on many different papers we've written up in this system. And so starting with Luis Baptista's work, we know that songs have changed over time as sound levels have increased over time in San Francisco. So these 1950s and 1960s songs that Luis Baptista recorded, he identified 3 different dialects that were in San Francisco: the Lake Merced dialect, the Presidio dialect, and the San Francisco dialect. And so Lake Merced dialect and Presidio dialect were lower pitched in general. They had lower minimum frequencies compared to the San Francisco dialect. And so in the 90s and early 2000s, when Liz and David came back, and then I came back again, we found that these songs had shifted upward. So the San Francisco dialect had spread and taken over. The Presidio dialect had gone extinct. And there's kind of a Lake Merced San Francisco dialect in South San Francisco, kind of a hybrid dialect. But mostly it's the San Francisco dialect, which originally had higher pitches, but it itself had also shifted up in pitch. And we think that's because of that increase in traffic noise in San Francisco in that time period. And I want you guys to keep in mind, so when these birds raise minimum frequency over time, it also changes the bandwidth of the song. So imagine those bottom parts of the song, of the trill portion of the song, basically being erased, or they're not singing those low parts of the song anymore. And that's important because we think vocal performance is a sexually selected trait. So they're singing to be heard, but they're losing these low frequency parts of their song that show off how sexy they are, essentially. And so for this first question, we have very basic methods is go out and measure the noise and go out and record songs and then take it back to the lab and measure it in a program called Signal. So that's me recording in Ghirardelli Square and some of my research assistants taking noise measurements in the Presidio. And so what we found is that as ambient noise increases, minimum frequency increases. And as expected, if minimum frequency increases, that frequency bandwidth decreases. So what does that mean for vocal performance in these birds? So these birds actually in noisier territories sing faster trill rates. So that might help them compensate for that loss of bandwidth. But when you look at the vocal deviation or that vocal performance, they're actually going down in vocal performance. So the way we measure vocal performance is a lower score is actually higher performance. So higher performance birds are in these quieter territories. So to answer the first part of our question, are adjustments to song structure affecting signal quality? The answer is for male-male competition, yes. Reduced bandwidth and performance is seen with increased anthropogenic noise. So let's move on to our second question. Are adjustments to song structure affecting signal salience? So to test this question, we use territorial playback experiments, and we're all permitted to do these playback experiments. So we use a balanced pairwise design with repeated measures. So each male gets tested once with a certain type of stimulus, depending on the playback. We observe the male for 2 minutes of pre-playback. We play the playback for 3 minutes, and we usually observe for 9 minutes of post-playback and measure many different behaviors depending on the experiment. Today, I'm mostly focusing on closest approach in terms of the results. So the closest approach tells us basically how angry that male was and how close he went looking to a speaker, looking for a male to beat up because he thought someone was on his territory. And so to first understand whether the change over time in minimum frequency had an effect on song salience, Liz and David did a playback with historic and current songs in San Francisco using Baptista's historic recordings. And so what they found, oh, thought I had that in there. So that was the 1969 song, and that's the 2005 song. And what they found is that the birds responded more strongly to the current songs, suggesting that current songs transmit better in the current environment. David also did a similar experiment with cardinals and found that when it was quiet, males respond more to lower minimum frequencies or low pitch songs. However, when it's noisy, they respond more to these higher minimum frequency songs. And so these experiments suggest that minimum frequency is important for song salience, but noise interferes with the perception of these low frequencies and is affecting cultural evolution. So when it's noisy, these higher frequencies are more effective. But the other problem with these experiments is that bandwidth was also varying along with minimum frequency. And so that led us to the hypothesis that songs with higher minimum frequency have reduced salience because they're narrower in bandwidth, not because of the loss of lower frequencies per se. And so to kind of graph out this hypothesis, we planned our next experiment where you would expect a high response strength at a normal bandwidth. If you remove the bottom 500 hertz of a song, you would expect a lower response rate. If it's all about low pitch notes, then you'd expect a regular response or a normal response to the top 500 hertz of the song removed. But if it's the bandwidth they're responding to, which is a part of vocal performance, then you expect the response to be lower if you remove the top 500 hertz. So to first answer this question, I conducted experiments testing whether minimum frequency or bandwidth were salient or useful signals that males respond to in male-male competition. So these first experiments tested whether males responded to differences in minimum frequency, and we found no difference in response. So a zero shifted song versus an upshifted song, the bandwidth is the same. We did this again with zero shifted versus downshifted. So the minimum frequency goes down, but the overall bandwidth of the song is the same, and found no difference in response. So they responded equally as strong to upshifted or downshifted songs. Next, we tested response to bandwidth changes in the trill, where we either had a full bandwidth or just low frequencies removed. And we found that males responded more strongly to full bandwidth songs. Then we did full bandwidth versus high removed. And again, they responded to full bandwidth songs. And then lastly, we did trials where we did low removed versus high removed, and we saw no difference in response. So what this shows is that males are responding more strongly to wide bandwidth, and it's not the minimum frequency that they're responding to. And so that supports our hypothesis again that they're responding to vocal performance, and that's a trait that is used in male-male competition. So these are our actual results compared to our hypothesized results. So to answer that question of are adjustments to song structure affecting signal salience, we can say yes, but I'm going to add one more experiment. Done a lot of playback experiments, and I'm going to ask, are trill rate and bandwidth equally important for urban and rural birds? So if vocal performance is important, can they make that up with changing trill rates? Or will they switch to maybe caring about trill rates more? Or is it vocal performance itself, that physically limited trade-off that they're responding to? So for this experiment, I tested 50 rural males and 22 urban males. And all those experiments I talked about before, each male heard only 2 different stimuli. This time they got 3 stimuli. There's a day in between each trial, and it's randomized, so they all get different orders of stimuli. So the 3 stimuli are wide bandwidth fast trill songs. So that's the highest performance song, or what I call stimulus A. There's a narrow bandwidth fast trill song, and that's stimulus B. And then there's a wide bandwidth slow trill song. And the main thing to take home from this experimental design is that narrow bandwidth fast trill songs have the same vocal performance as wide bandwidth slow trill stimuli. So we can ask, is trill rate or bandwidth what they're paying attention to, or is it vocal performance? And so when we do this experiment with rural birds, they respond similarly to songs of equivalent performance. So wide bandwidth fast trill songs are responded to the most and significantly differently than narrow bandwidth fast trill songs. Same thing for wide bandwidth fast trill songs versus wide bandwidth slow trill songs. And then these 2 that have the same vocal performance get the same amount of response. But we see something a little bit differently when we do this experiment with urban birds in San Francisco. So between wide bandwidth and narrow bandwidth songs, the trill rate is the same. You still see differentiation. So I thought because they were in a noisy city, they would maybe not care about bandwidth as much, but they still care about bandwidth. They still treat the songs that are equivalent in their vocal performance scores equally. But surprisingly, they actually care less about trill rate in urban areas. So they do not differentiate between fast trills and slow trills in noise. And, oh, I must have left that slide out, but they also, as it gets noisier, they respond more strongly, or they start responding strongly to basically everything, whether it's wide bandwidth or narrow bandwidth. So there's an interaction with the noise level on the territory. So noise basically makes these males more aggressive overall. And that's probably because they can't tell who's bigger and better than them. So they're approaching pretty much everyone and looking for a fight because they can't assess them from far away. So are adjustments to song structure affecting signal salience? For territorial males, yes. Lower frequency songs are more salient in less noisy environments. We see stronger responses to songs with higher vocal performance, and wide bandwidth still elicits strong responses in noisy urban environments. Oops. So to summarize kind of this section of the results, we see reduced bandwidth and performance with increases in anthropogenic noise. We see wide bandwidth and high vocal performance songs are salient across soundscapes. So there is a loss in terms of sexually selected traits in these urban areas. They still care about wide bandwidth, but they can't hear it. So if the song salience is affected, if we zoom out and kind of think conceptually about urban systems and birds and songs and why songs are important, it all leads us to fitness outcomes. And so that's where I'm going to move into part 2 and ask, what are the effects of noise and light on nesting birds? So I haven't done experiments with white-crowned sparrows in light yet, but hopefully someday. For this section, I'm moving into my New Mexico system that I mentioned. So to answer this question, I'm going to look at 3 main things. So settlement, how many nests will birds build in treatments of light and noise? Success, what is the percent fledged, depredated, and abandoned across treatments of light and noise? And survival, I'll present to you some logistic exposure models to look at what we predict affects survival the most in a variety of birds. And so in this system, I did show this earlier, but I'll give you a little more detail. We know that noise indirectly, these dotted lines indicate indirect effects. So noise in this system indirectly increases nest success in some species because it negatively affects the pinion jays and woodhouse's scrub jays that are in this system, and they're nest predators, major nest predators. So the nesting community overall kind of gets an indirect positive effect. But now we're going to add light to this system, this hypotheses diagram. And so being out there, and probably anyone can attest to this, when you're standing next to a light post, there's lots of insects that are attracted to that light post. So because of this, I hypothesized that this would increase nest success potentially if there's increased food availability, especially for insectivores. So there's an indirect benefit of light in a system to nest success. For nest predators, I hypothesized that they would avoid light. I could be wrong about that, but that's kind of my general inkling. If they're sensitive to noise, they might be sensitive to other sensory pollutants. And that again would have a indirect benefit effect on nest success. So let me tell you a little bit more about my New Mexico system. So this is an overview of kind of what the landscape looks like. You have these mesas with pinyon juniper forest, and it's actually fairly intact forest, except for these oil and gas wells that are extracting natural gas. And so some of them have noisy compressors added to the wells that just basically suck the gas out faster. But they're super noisy. So you're standing right next to it. It's like being next to an airplane taking off. So that really permeates into the forest around these noisy plots. And so Clint Francis, my collaborator, started these plots 10, 12 years ago now. And so what I've done is gone out and expanded some of these to have light and noise treatments, light only, and then we also still have our noise and control treatment. So there's 4 types of treatments. And just to give you an aerial view of what this looks like, we have 6 color clusters with the 4 treatments each. So basically 6 replicates of the 4 treatments, kind of clustered by latitudes in case there's any sort of latitudinal effects. But overall, you can see there's this kind of mixed pinyon juniper forest, and they're pretty much all the same in every way, other than some of them having the louder noise and some of them having the light that we set up. And so we have a bird box system across these treatment plots where we have a little bit over 240 bird boxes across all sites. And we check these in the breeding season for activity every week. While we're doing this, we also do 1.5 hours of nest searching per site. And at the light or light plus noise sites, we have light pointed directly at 2 boxes per site. So 10 boxes of lit cavity nesting opportunities for birds. And I'll briefly go over this but if anyone's super excited about stats, we can talk about it later. I use GLMM, so generalized linear mixed models, using the program R to look at the response variables of total nests, percent fledged, percent abandoned, and percent depredated. And our independent variables are treatment, LAQ, which is the sound level, and light, yes or no for this analysis, although I'm working on getting the lux levels into these models. And then I'm also using logistic exposure survival model. So takes into account how many times we visited the nests, what stage we found the nest at, et cetera, to take all these other things that can affect bird survival or nest survival. And so I just finished my 3rd season, so I haven't added the new data to this analysis yet. So this is from data collected in 2018 and 2019. And then 2020, of course, was disrupted by the pandemic. But from those first 2 years, we had 356 nests total over these 2 seasons. And so these are some of our common nesters. So in our nest box system, we get the mountain bluebirds, the western bluebirds. So those are probably my 2 favorites, although I love the Buick's wrens, the juniper titmice, ash-throated flycatchers. They're kind of weird little chicken nuggets. That one doesn't have much or many pin feathers showing yet. They have these very interesting fur nests. And then white-breasted nuthatches. The white-breasted nuthatches also make fur nests, and they're pretty stinky. And then for our open cup nesters, we have usually about 31 nesting species, but the most common by far are our gray flycatchers. These are my favorite nests to find up here in the upper right corner. And our chipping sparrow nests, so also very common. So those are our biggest data sets. So I can't wait to add the more data to that from this season. We also get a decent amount of blue-gray gnatcatchers here. So you see that tail, see the nest and the tail coming up on the upper left photo and the little eyeball poking out. Tail is always a dead giveaway for open cup nest. Then we have birds like house finches and Say's phoebes that like to nest on the gas extraction equipment. And then we have things like northern mockingbirds and spotted towhees, lark sparrows, all sorts of things. But by far the most common are the gray flycatchers and the chipping sparrows. And so let's talk about settlement first. So where are these birds choosing to nest across these sites? So overall, birds are not avoiding sensory pollution. They could choose to maybe, use the corridors in between these, oil and gas industry buildup, but they still use these sites, and they're in the long run not really avoiding noise or light for these songbird species. So what we tend to see is that birds are actually settling on light sites more. They're choosing to nest on lit sites. Although the trend is not significant from these 2 years of data. And so that's why I'm really excited to add my third year of data and see if that becomes a significant trend or not. So the null model is the top model when I ran the stats on the first 2 years. But you do see that trend of birds tending to nest more on lit sites and less as noise increases. So I don't think they want to be near the noise, but they'll take what they can get. Especially for cavity nesters, they don't have a lot of choices. So again, there's always competition for nesting habitat. But out here, we have the nice thing about the system that I forgot to mention is that you really don't have any of those invasive species competing for nesting sites. So it is just the native species that would normally be out there. There's no house sparrows or starlings. And there's obviously no urban buildup. And then if you dive into species by species trends, we see that bluebirds might be the ones that are driving this attraction to light trend. So you do see actually a significant effect of light on bluebirds, where bluebirds, let's see, on the left, I have Western bluebirds. Bluebirds are tending to nest near light the most, and then light and noise. And then actually noise a little bit more than control plots. So they're tolerant to noise. And so they might be reaping those benefits in the long term. In terms of mountain bluebirds, again, we have slightly less mountain bluebirds than the Western bluebirds, but they do tend to nest near light and noise. The chipping sparrows also seem to be attracted to light. So they're the most abundant on light sites, second most abundant on light and noise. And this is a significant trend. Followed by control, and then the least on noise only plots. And you see the same type of trend with blue-gray gnatcatchers, also significant. So blue-gray gnatcatchers seem to be attracted to light, and the light plus noise in a second choice. And then control and noise are not significantly different from each other. The flycatchers, so we have ash-throated flycatchers that are cavity nesters and gray flycatchers that are open cup nesters. They trend towards control. So both of them, you see the purple bars are higher, but overall they don't show a preference. So again, maybe with some more data, we'll see that the flycatchers are actually more sensitive to sensory pollution, light and noise. Yeah, we'll see what we get with one more year of data there. So they're either avoiding sensory pollution or maybe kind of just ignoring it. And moving on to success, our percentages. For abandonment, we found a top model with additive effects of light and noise. So abandonment is best modeled by light and noise combined. And so we can split this into two visualizations. So sites that have light in yellow, yes, have a higher rate of abandonment, about 50%, than sites without light. And then as noise increases, you see a slow but steady increase in abandonment rates. We do see that light and noise does deter predators. So when we examine the models for depredation, we find treatment has the best model fit. So light and noise and their combined effects have lower depredation than control plots significantly. But the percent of depredated nests is lower on all treatments compared to control. So control has, the most depredations. And again, the biggest nest predator out here is that scrub jay. But light and noise are not deterring scrub jays any more so together. It's not an additive effect, at least in these 2 years of data. You don't see light and noise having the highest survival rate. So we'll see if that changes over time. But when you look at success, so the percentage of fledged nests, it's the same across treatments. So it doesn't seem like they're truly getting a long-term benefit from choosing light or light and noise or noise sites if it is deterring predators. Okay, and lastly, let's look at our survival logistic exposure models. And so for this logistic exposure model, this was on 160 of the open cup nests, so not counting the cavity nests in the nest boxes. And it only includes nests that had eggs using the fixed effects of the lux level, so the actual light level, the noise level, the nest stage, and the visibility score of the nest. So we do a very intense protocol on how visible the nest is. And then the species and the color cluster were used as random effects. And so what we see is a strong negative effect of lux on daily survival. So this is the max lux here on the left graph on the x-axis, and survival. I need to work on making these graphs better, but I'm going to add more data to it, so I haven't played around with it yet. But anyways, the take-home message is as light increases, the daily survival decreases for nests. And noise has the opposite effect. So as noise increases on the right-hand side, daily survival increases. So to think about our answers, what are the effects of noise and light on nesting birds? For settlement, we see that overall birds are not avoiding light or noise, and they do seem to be attracted to light. So we'll see if that increases or not with another year of data. For success, there is a higher abandonment rate at lit sites, and sensory pollution is acting as a predator shield. And in terms of survival, light has a significant negative effect on daily survival, while noise tends to have a positive effect. And that might be, when I'm looking at percent fledged, that might be why you kind of see a no effect in terms of fledging. So what I think is going on here is that light is acting as an ecological trap. So I think birds are potentially wasting time and energy building failed nests at lit sites. And if they're choosing nest sites during the day, they may not realize the light is there. So they start building and then they spend a few nights near the nest and they're like, oh, this is awful. And then they take off and go build somewhere else. Or if they're choosing sites at night, they might be attracted by increased insects, but the loss of sleep or other physiological tolls might be making them abandon later on in the breeding cycle. The cost of abandonment might cancel out with the predator shield in terms of the fledge rate. And there might be a benefit of the predator shield, the benefit of the predator shield is not additive in light and noise. So just because you have two sensory pollutants doesn't mean there's going to be less depredation. It seems like noise might really be the main thing keeping predators away from nests. So overall, we're not seeing any benefit to fledging rates of light or noise in this system. And there's likely developmental and physiological costs to fledging from sensory polluted sites. And that's what I hope to look at in some of my future research. And so I just wanted to mention one more thing. So scaling up from my New Mexico system, we just had a paper come out this year in Nature, and we're investigating these questions at larger scale. So this is actually using NestWatch data across the continental United States. And So this is basically asking the same types of questions, but on a much larger scale. So we had 58,506 nests records and 142 species in this study. And this map is showing the points that were used from NestWatch data. So let's see, black is successful nests and red were unsuccessful nests. And so we paired that data with national park estimations of noise exceedance values. L50 values, which are sound levels that exceed the value 50% of the time of a normal background level. So basically, what is the anthropogenic noise on top of whatever the natural noise is? And so this graph at the bottom, or this figure at the bottom, shows just some of the species that are affected either by noise on the top row, so the cardinal, titmouse, barn swallow, bluebird, and oh, I'm blanking. They're here everywhere. The other swallow, the purple barton, there we go. And all these species that are affected by light, and they're affected in all these different ways. So timing of nests, so when are they initiating their clutches? What is the size of the clutch? Clutch failure, partial hatch, and success. So there's lots of different effects we're seeing across lots of different species. And so the take-home message really is that there's lots of individual variability depending on what scale you're looking at, what species you're looking at, and we need to keep collecting data at local, regional, and global scales to understand how sensory pollution impacts species. But we can already see that there are many negative effects, and these are things we should begin working on in terms of mitigation. And I know that's something Audubon is working on already with the Lights Out project and other projects. And so, as Patsy mentioned at the beginning, I just got here in January, so I'm starting to set up my system here in San Antonio, and I'd like to keep doing my research in New Mexico and California, but also set up a system here where we can look across the continuous matrix of noise and light pollution along with the variable urban land cover, and take this research to the next step with some hands-on monitoring of behavior, nesting success, and movement of a variety of bird species. So if you have nesting birds in your yard and you're already monitoring them, please let me know. Or if you want to get involved in any way, I put 80 bird boxes on campus this summer and had some great students working on that all summer, checking nests and monitoring nests and finding open cup nests also along the Mission Reach of the Riverwalk as well. So I'd like to get some citizen science projects going. So please let me know if you're interested. And I think I'm pretty much out of time. So thank you guys for inviting me to give this talk, and all the students and faculty and funders that have helped me over the years in all these projects, because it's really coming together and we're really starting to find some really interesting things. So thank you.
Now I have to remember to turn my mic on. We do have some questions and comments in the, trying to move you back over here so I don't. Okay, here we go. In the chat, I can find them now. Here we go. Let's see. Okay. Oh, well, it's just a comment. It says, has anyone looked into noise canceling technology for the high noise and the petroleum extraction? You know, to reduce that noise as part of a mitigation.
Yeah, like sound barriers or they, well, yeah, it does not seem to be implemented in very many places. So they did add some like sheds with very thin walls and some of the compressors, but it really doesn't do much. So I haven't seen like thicker, at least in my system. But that's a great question. I think, you know, we're trying to get the word out there and trying to get people to use this, but it is really something that is, people are just like, oh, it'll be fine. It's not that big of a deal. So I do think it is underutilized when you could, you know, use these types of mitigation measures in oil and gas designs, I guess.
And of course, mitigation costs money.
Yeah, right. No one ever wants to spend a little more money, but
Exactly. Here's a comment from, or question from Greg. Do the birds that stay in place despite noise and light have any other choices?
yeah, they do. Well, I think they could. Yeah, there's plenty of pinyon juniper throughout the Southwest. So, and there are our control plots are quiet. So they, there are options, and there are lots of natural cavities. We find empty natural cavities. So they do have options. So yeah, I'm perplexed too. This experiment would not work if they didn't choose to nest near these things, but they still do. So that's the problem, right?
Yeah. Well, it could be you have selective pressure on the birds that choose, I'll put it in quotes, wisely. In other words, the combination of factors that results in greater survivability, which is really the measure of evolutionary success. How many young do you leave behind? That kind of thing. And it could be some kind of a random shuffle of traits that come together, and that bird is more successful than the other, and it produces more young. A combination of factors. Very hard to tease it apart.
Right. Yeah, it could be, since these oil and gas wells have been in place, the birds that nested near them have been more successful. So if that is inherited in any way, you get more noise tolerant species over time, potentially. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Well, please keep us apprised of what you're doing and what you need, as far as citizen or community scientists. Because I want everybody to know that Dr. Jen has sent us a lot of volunteers from her students to help with the lights out, and they have been excellent surveyors and helpers in that, and we really appreciate that. So we can return the favor. A lot of people are already involved in Nest Watch, and I think this really points out the importance of community science on things like that. People that are already involved in these things, and that is, that was your big study. It's crowdsourcing data.
Yeah, I did download just like the Bear County data set. So I could start playing with what we got. So if you're doing it, keep doing it. Get your friends to do it. Okay. But I could also start sending out protocols for next season so I could get it sooner, because I don't know how long it takes them to process it and put it up for the local researchers to use, right?
I see thank you, Greg, for reminding me that there was another comment from Judith Green, who's one of our urban biologists. If you haven't met her yet, you need to. She asked, would you have a dedicated nesting project in iNaturalist that we could join? What exactly would you need from us if we had a nest in our yard?
Yeah,
good question. Thank you, Judith.
Good question. Yeah. So I could totally start a iNat project where if you have a nest in your yard, you can monitor it each week and just update the status. So 1 egg, 3 eggs, day 1 chicks, day 5 chicks. Yeah, easy. If you can take a picture, or if you can't take a picture, you can always just enter the data on online, either through iNat, or I can set up a Google sheet or something like that.
Well, iNaturalist, I know you're a very big fan of that, and I'm becoming increasingly excited about it, because anywhere you go in the world, you can use it. There are people all over the world entering data and identifying things, and it's really grown. I know it's kind of from your neck of the woods up in California. Yeah. And if you would have something like that, it's just like for Lights Out San Antonio, we have, or Lights Out Texas, they have an iNaturalist project dedicated. And all the birds that we find that are, killed by bird strikes on buildings are entered there. And it was very interesting to see the difference in Houston and Dallas and El Paso and San Antonio. Of course, they even did one out in West Texas in the middle of nowhere, and they found out there are not any buildings out there. So not many you could run into. But those kind of projects where you provide the structure and you tell us what you need, and then we just plug it in, you know, and if we can ask questions like, well, what do you mean by this, or whatever. Even a little training session, once you get it set up, we could certainly facilitate that in a Zoom session.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I need to do that. I said I would do it and I haven't done it yet. So now's the time.
Okay, we're gonna,
In your spare
and
time.
next week in your spare time, anytime, that's fine. No, we really do. That would be the best way to get people involved, because the more structure you put to it and the less we have, and also it makes the data stronger.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
that kind of thing. So let's see if I've missed anybody else in the chat. And very interesting. I think that, you know, people wave their arms around and say things, but without data to back it up, and it takes you, people like you, to go out in the desert of New Mexico, or to go out in the Bay Area and listen to those things. And it always impresses me is how much good old dirty grunge work it takes to do this kind of field work. And
Yeah,
we salute you for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you. And if anytime you want to come and give us an update, or if you want to schedule a training program for this INAT project, we'd be glad to work with you on that. And we can invite our membership and make it available to the master naturalists and so forth.
Great. That sounds like I will definitely be contacting you soon.
Okay, very good. Well, anybody have any other comments? There's a new comment, my husband says. Well, lots of thank yous. Thank you for the session. Very interesting. I would like to spend some more time. And of course, this has been recorded. And the recording by tomorrow will be posted. A link to it will be posted on our website, Bear Audubon website. And also our videos are now going to be posted on Vimeo. So if you need more time to study those graphs, which I do, or if you don't want to, you want to go through it again, or you missed something, please take advantage of that. And some of your students may want to do that if they weren't able to attend and live tonight.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. And we're so happy to have you here. And we look forward to working with you and getting some science done around here. Be great.
Great. Thank you guys. Yeah, I'll be in touch.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. And if you have comments on any of or if you have something you would be interested in, maybe something was stimulated in this talk, a topic that you would like to hear discussed, please let us know what it is, because Dr. Phillips has lots of, as you see, collaborators, and there may be somebody out there that knows what you want to know. And we can ask him to come in and give us a talk. So I'll say good night and thanks everybody for coming. And thank you so much, Dr. Phillips, for coming in and helping us. So see you on the birding trail, guys. Thanks a lot. Night, night.
Good night.
Thanks.